Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast.
Hi everybody, how you doing out there? Welcome to the Arcane Alienist. Today's show, our main topic, I want to talk a little bit about the Elric Saga by Michael Moorcock. Michael Moorcock. I've got X-Men on the brain. Or is it H.G. Wells? Could go either way. Michael Moorcock. But before we do that, we got some calls from Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, as well as Daniel Norton of the Bandits Keep. But before I get to the calls, I want to talk about a product I got off Drive Through RPG. These are called, what are these called? Old school spell cards. They're really primarily designed to be used with old school essentials, but you could use them with BX or any kind of OSR game that uses that works with the original, BX spells, because these are designed with old school essentials. So they use the BX spell list for clerics and magic users, with those descriptions and features of the spells that you find in D&D. But these are old school spell cards from David Nielsen, and you can find these on Drive Through RPG. If you just want a PDF, it's $4.99. If you want to order the cards, it's $18.99, and then you can, of course, do the PDF plus the cards, and you basically get the PDF for free for purchasing the cards. At least that's where it is right now. That's usually how they do things when you buy a PDF with the physical product, but occasionally what I always see is they list the combined price and then they mark it out and then just put the price of the print product. So it's $18.99 right now for the time being to get the cards, or to get the cards with the PDF, which I think is worth it if you want to print your own just on cardstock, save yourself some money. But these are really, really nice cards. They are the size of a playing card, and they are coated. So that's just like, opening up a box of playing cards, and there's all the cleric and magic user spells from Old School Essentials. They got a really nice simple descriptions like you find in OSE of how the spells work on the face of the card, and then the back of the card is you've got either a picture of a magic user who's casting some kind of spell from his finger. I'm assuming it's probably some kind of ray. I don't know if it's intended to be any specific spell, since magic missile doesn't exist in. Or does it? Does magic missile exist in Old School Essentials? It's been a while. Oh, yes, it does. But I don't think he's casting Magic Missile, because Magic Missile has its own artwork on the face of the card. But there's some kind of ray coming from his finger extended. Maybe it's the death spell. And then the cleric cards feature. So it's a male magic user. You've got a female cleric just kind of posed with her shield and her mace. Not really casting a spell, but nice black and white pencil art like you will see in a lot of old school books, original books, and OSR artwork. They're just black and white interior art. But again, a lot of the spells have a specific illustration of the caster casting the spell on the facing side, and then they sort of backing that just says cleric spell with a picture of the cleric, or magic user with the spells with a picture of the magic user. And you can preview these on Drive Through RPG. I'll put a link to the page on Drive Through RPG in the show description today so that you can take a look at them. But I really like spell cards. I think they're a really interesting way, or good way for spellcasting characters to kind of organize, so they're not having to flip through the book, and they're not also having to kind of handwrite all the descriptions of the spells they do have. They can just, have a stack of cards, organize them however they want. You can sleeve them. You can put them in the loose leaf binder sleeves like you would use for a baseball card collection, or a Magic the Gathering card collection or anything like that. Or they even make these little card size books that almost look like something you might once put pictures in for, when you carry pictures in your wallet. But they're meant for collectible cards, and they actually look like a little book. So I think it's kind of cool when you do that, because then it actually looks like a spell book. It's a little book you can unsnap or undo the binding, and you open it up, and it's got pages, but the pages are just plastic, bound plastic sleeves, a book of plastic sleeves. You can slip the cards in. I think that's pretty cool. And I've seen, I think a couple places of looking online of different people who said they do that with their players. They gift them all one of those because they're pretty cheap. And then your clerics and wizards and other spellcasters have a little spellbook prop they use at the table that also helps them organize their play materials. So check those out. Really great product. I bought them on a whim. My last episode I talked about blending Knave with old school essentials. I did that with just a short. We played for a couple hours with my son and one of his friends. They had a really good time. Everything seemed to work really well. There were a couple of rules I forgot, trying to get back in the swing of running games, but also because we were amending it. It was old school essentials with some things replaced or enhanced with the Knave rules. So I'm sure it'll get smoother as I get back into practice, and particularly with using that particular combination of rules. But we printed out some of these cards because I didn't have the cards. We just printed them out before the game and cut them out on a printer paper. So you're not real sturdy and blew off the table. If anybody moved too quick, just that little gust of wind or a movement of air would push them across the table. But these are nice, heavy, coated playing card size. So I think they'll stand up to kind of routine table activity for role playing games. So we'll definitely use these the next time we play. So speaking of that, we do have some calls again from Jason and from Daniel. So let's get to the calls. We'll go through those and then we'll wrap up with the main topic of today's show. So let's see first up, we're going to talk to Jason. So let's see what he has to say.
Hey BJ, Jason here. Listen to your heavy metal majory episode about 13 and a half minutes in during your musical interludes where everyone else listens to some episodes of Bandits Keep. But I've already heard those episodes. So I wanted to call in on Daniel's comment. And I know this isn't necessarily what he meant, but I don't think a more complex system like, say, AD&D is a bad thing for your desert island game. Because what Daniel's saying, well, what are you going to do when you run out of material and get bored? Well, if you're making your own setting in your own world, that's not an issue, right? So I guess it depends, and this is a whole side tangent, but if you have a set of solid game mechanics that you're happy with, do you really need to tinker with those? Or do you just change the setting and change the world as you go through different games or keep your game going? Do you really need to be able to plug in and change mechanics? I mean, that's handy. And the good thing about most of the TSR games they're modular enough to easily do that. That's a huge strength of the TSR era games. They're very modular and it's very easy to plug and play different things in there. They're very hackable. So any of those probably would be a good answer to this desert island game. But I don't think even with a more complex game, it's necessarily an issue if you're making your own homebrew setting, if you're happy with the rule set. So I just want to kind of interject there. That's kind of a side tangent. But since everybody else has listened to the episodes of Bandits Keep, I figured you had time to listen to this. Okay, let me get back to the show.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I think one thing, and thinking about what Daniel had talked about, you can take a simpler game. If you have that one game, because and I think what he was talking about when you look at these big complex games, and I don't know if he meant so much the rules complexity as the sheer weight of a complete edition. So if you want to stop with 5th edition right now, or at least at the end of this year before they convert over to whatever this next iteration is, that they're it's not an edition, it's just Dungeons and Dragons. It's basically 5.5. So if you just want to take 5th edition in its whole before they get to that, which I think the last couple of books are going to come out this year, that's a lot of material when you consider the player's handbook, the monster manual, the dungeon master's guide, and then the core the 3 kind of main core supplemental books that add more class options, more monsters, more spells. That's a lot to do, to take with you. And then when you consider every time they kind of introduce a new setting in 5th edition, they also add some more monsters and class options and things like that. So the complete 5th edition with all options on the table, just the ones officially from Wizards of the Coast is really a lot of material, even though the system itself hasn't gotten any more or less complex with all the additions. It's just added more options. But I think whether you're talking about a big weighty thing like 5th edition D&D or Pathfinder 2nd edition, or something simple like BX Old School Essentials or original D&D White Box, if that's a system as a DM and you're prone to tinker, you can play with the rules and kind of get the flexibility out of the rules. And I know I've talked in a couple of recent episodes about not every rule set emulates every genre. Sometimes you need some additional rules that really speak to, you might want to tack onto a core system that helps you emulate a very specific genre or feel or motive that you may not want in every game. But I think a DM who knows their system, a game master who really knows their system, can take those systems and adapt them. I will say though, I think probably the simpler systems are well, not the simpler systems, the leaner systems maybe are easier to adapt. You can adapt. You know what? I say that. If you ever watched Dimension 20, they did a campaign where they're playing 5th edition. It's set in modern day New York. The idea is that there's a sort of fantasy magical fairy realm kind of in parallel, or that exists. It's just most people don't see it. Almost like you see in the Dresden Files. But so one guy's playing a paladin, he's a firefighter, and they just sort of re-describe what he's doing as something that he's doing as a New York City firefighter, just because he's a good guy. And they've got a monk who is basically a Real Housewife kind of character, playing a drunken master monk. She's an alcoholic Long Island housewife, and they just reflavor everything she does as a monk in terms of. So it takes some creativity. So you can reflavor a lot of stuff, and I guess emulate somewhat different settings and genres. I don't know if that's truly a different genre or if it's just sort of a reflavored, but you're still getting sort of the same feel of D&D. But yeah, I think a good DM, through their world building and through just knowing how to house rule and how to take pieces of systems, they're kind of. And 5th edition is actually fairly modular if you kind of read some of the options in the DMG of how to take them out and change them out for things. But yeah, I think a DM can take one system and get a lot of flexibility if they know the system, if they understand how it's built, and they have some experience with it. I will say though that we've talked about. I mean, Daniel referenced original D&D when he said that was what he would take, and I would say that the proof is kind of in the pudding there, because the whole white box role playing genre right now is all based on original D&D. There's just different slight variations of original white box D&D, the first 3 books, taking the rule set and maybe creating new monsters or new spells or new equipment or things like that. But it seems like it's very easy to do that if you want to do that and you kind of have some creativity. Joe Salvador, who we've both done podcast episodes with and have talked with before, has his Cthulhu version of white box, Eldritch Tales. There's a space opera version of white box. There are all kinds of different versions of white box rules that are just based on those core concepts of original D&D. So, the original D&D, very flexible. So I'm not surprising that Daniel's getting a little mileage out of that. So yeah, so I think you can take one system with you on a desert island if it's the system and the system you do well, and through your own knowledge of ability to house rule things, tinker with things, come up with alternative rules, you can make it work for you for a lot of stuff. So thanks for the call, Jason, although we've got one more from you, so let's see what else you have to say.
Hey, Jason again. So, listen to you finish the episode on heavy meta magery. It never struck home to me before how similar Knave is to ICRPG. And now Knave is slightly different. It's got a different design goal. The idea of Knave, if I remember right, was that you could run TSR era modules with Knave. And so ICRPG isn't really designed to do that. But listening to you talk, it's like, wow, he's recreating ICRPG. Because now, not exactly, but ICRPG does all that stuff too. You check things against your tributes. Your inventory is how you create your character by your slots. Yeah, there are like archetypes and classes, but you don't have to use those. And in earlier ICRPG, it was basically classless anyway. Um, the there's just the idea of easy or hard rolls. Is what you've incorporated for your rogue, and it just reminded me how close ICRPG is to kind of what you're looking for. I wonder if that's not actually a better base. Um, very interesting. I am curious to see what you come up with. Uh, you got to talk about verisimilitude in your world and all, and then you got to talk about like creation of these metal tablets and how it's somebody's life work to just create a couple of those. That's where it breaks down for me. And like, if magic items are legacy of previous civilizations or this or that, that's one thing. But if you've got a mage out there, he cranks out 3 magic items in his life, and that's all he does. But there are all these magic items out there for adventurers to venture with. That's kind of where these worlds break for me and get silly for me. If you have a bunch of magic in your world, then it doesn't make sense. It's hard to create magic items. And if you have a bunch of characters running around with spell books, then you've got a bunch of magic in your world. So that's kind of where the verisimilitude breaks down for me. So I don't know that I'd make it that. I like the idea of spells being hard to find, and maybe spells are kind of lost, so what's out there is out there. And if you find something, maybe you can copy it. Yeah, that risk of maybe losing it. I like that kind of idea. But yeah, maybe spells are kind of a lost technology that you're kind of recovering is one thing, and maybe there aren't new magic items being created, and that's all cool. But if you do have the ability to create this stuff, it I don't know. I always found magic item creation rules to be kind of wonky in some of these games, considering the amount of magic that's out in the world. But very interesting. Definitely looking forward to hearing how your project develops and how it goes. So keep up the great work. Please keep letting us know your progress and the things you develop, and I will talk to you soon.
All right, Jason. Thanks for the second call there. Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of similarity there between Knave and ICRPG. You could probably borrow rules from both of them and mix and match, because I think IC Index Card RPG, I believe, started as sort of a hack of 5th edition that had some sort of modern D&D sensibilities, just to play that kind of game in a simpler, more flexible manner. And Knave started as an attempt to sort of bring those same sort of modern mechanical sensibilities and understanding to play old school games, like you're saying. And that's kind of why I went with Knave. I kept thinking maybe I should look at RPG as I'm doing this. But specifically because Knave is designed to pair with things like old school essentials, and it's got some suggestions on how to use spells and monsters, which it doesn't provide a lot of itself. Well, it does provide some spells. There's a list of level of spells you could use, but it provides some guidance if you just want to use the traditional spells from a like TSR era game, as well as using monsters from original D&D, basic D&D, even AD&D. So I think that's why it just seemed like it was naturally built to pair with the other system I wanted to use. But yeah, I definitely would pilfer some ideas from Index Card RPG. I think that's actually where, without realizing it, I got the idea of letting a thief or a halfling also roll against a 12 instead of a 15 on their ability check for stealthy kinds of things. That's kind of I think plus and minus 3 is how they do roll easy and roll hard in Index RPG. I think that's probably where I pulled that in somewhere out of the back of my mind and go, we'll just make this an easier roll at a 12, because it doesn't quite warrant advantage. I want them to still be able to get advantage in other ways, or have disadvantage in other ways. And so, yeah. But as far as item creation, I hear what you're saying on the how's magic rare when there are wizards running around, and if a wizard can only create a few items in their whole lifetime, where are all these magic items coming from? And I think for me, the only answer I've had, I don't know if this will work for you, is trying to keep in mind and maybe as a world builder, when you're a GM, you need to telegraph this or display this to the players to help them remember that uh, what are the base rates of how many wizards are there really in the world, and how many magic items are there in the world, and how many adventurers are there in the world relative to the number of people in the world. Are adventures really common and they're everywhere? Some parts of D&D, particularly when they talk about, there's always adventurers and hirelings to have in old school D&D, and then there's rival adventuring parties that you're going to run into from time to time. Makes it sound like there's a lot of adventurers, and they're naturally going to have clerics and magic users in their number. You could hire clerics and magic users as henchmen and hirelings. So it does make it seem like there are adventures everywhere. But if you think about sort of, the representative heuristic, the representativeness bias, things that seem common to you because they naturally occur in the environment you've selected for yourself. So it's easy for you to assume that they're more numerous or more common than they are. So you might think about that as adventurers are always running into adventurers, because adventurers go where adventurers go and they do what adventurers do. But that's still a very small number of people relative to the total population of the world they inhabit. Sometimes we don't maybe take times to emphasize that to players so that they remember that, yeah, I'm a wizard, and I know 5 or 6 wizards, and I fought 2 or 3 wizards, at this point in my career, and I've amassed this hoard of magical stuff. But that's still things that the vast majority of common people may never see. I think when you look at modern D&D, particularly from 3rd edition on, you don't get that. They're specifically going for a high magic, high fantasy world where stuff like that is everywhere. And even though everybody can't do it, everybody's probably seen a wizard and seen a few magical things in their time, and they have just an inkling of at least some common knowledge. If they don't understand how it works, they at least know what it does sometimes. So if you see these kind of modern worlds like that, but I've always felt like the older D&D worlds still kind of leave that magic is strange and foreign and scary to the common person, and poorly understood even by people who have witnessed it and are around it more, unless they're actually a spellcaster. So for me, it's always just saying, yeah, you're going to find a lot of this stuff, and you're going to know other people who truck in these artifacts and these magic items, but that's because you're a part of a select segment of society that just kind of, again, you cross paths with these people because you're going the same places they're going. You're interested in the same things they're interested in. Think about certain professions in the real world. Like, by training and trade, I'm a psychologist. I know lots of psychologists, and I think there are a lot of people who aren't psychologists who maybe know a few psychologists, but they don't know what we do, and the things we do aren't common everyday experiences for them. And then, worldwide, there's not that many of us really when you look at the total population of the world. So, I think it's a matter of perspective. And if you can emphasize that from time to time, you might be able to maintain that verisimilitude about magic is common in your experience, but it's very rare in the grand scheme of things in the world you inhabit, right? Anyway, maybe that explains it. Maybe it doesn't. Let me know what you think. But again, I always appreciate getting calls from Jason. Always very thoughtful. Always good things to point out. So hopefully, maybe we'll hear back from him on this topic a little more in the future. But let's move on. We've got a call from Daniel to wrap up our calls before we get into the main segment.
Hey, BJ. Daniel managed to keep calling in about your spellbook idea. Also, thanks for the shout out. Very, very cool. I love it. I love the idea of these giant metal books that they're like lugging around. And also I like the idea of magic users not necessarily, and clerics as well, not necessarily even owning their books, or early on at least, right? Like they are maybe the properties of these mage libraries or the temples, right? And the player characters are just going in there and like scratching scrolls down. Maybe for their first adventure, you comp basically a player character 1 scroll, so they can do the normal, first level character has that 1 casting on the first adventure. And then they better hope they get some gold so they can scratch some more scrolls when they get back. And then I guess at a certain point, they can buy a book if they, when they get to higher levels and they want to start going on adventures and they want to take the books with them, then they can actually afford to buy them because maybe you make them more expensive, or again, maybe they're just loaned to them and they got to bring them back. And if they lose them, then they got to pay for them. The other cool thing about this is if you are playing in a game where, and again, I guess clerics are this too, right? They are in my games anyways, where they need spell books, then you're looking at the idea of, well, like if you look at BX, right, or see the basic version anyways, they only have the one spell, right? A magic user gets their spell, okay, they have sleep spell, and then that's all they got, right? But if you do it this way, they could pick any spell if it's available in that mage library. So they could actually switch up their spell without it being that they have a book full of spells and kind of changing the basic structure of the BX system. Anyways, I really love it. I think it's a great idea. To Carl, 100%, I will reach out and jump in on that Traveler game if there's a space for me still in October-ish. Kind of, this month's a little bit hectic, but I would love to try out Traveler. Mongoose Traveler sounds very good, and I think Space Truckin' sounds pretty cool.
All right, Daniel, consider those ideas stolen for my. I know I love that. I love the idea, like you're saying, that maybe when you start off, you're still basically an acolyte in the temple or a novitiate, or as a wizard or a magic user, you're still kind of just apprentice or just one kind of rung above apprentice, and you still have to go to your master or to your academy, or as a cleric, you have to go to the temple and work from their library to get yourself scrolls, and part of your expectation as part of that religious order, or as part of whatever that a wizard's guild or an esoteric society that wizards belong to. Maybe you have to contribute something to the library, and every time if you do get your hands on an artifact, it's like, well, do I keep this to myself or do I donate it, and then I'll have access to it to go study it and make scrolls. But there's choices to be made there. I could increase my prestige and standing in the society, or I could just hoard it as kind of a personal resource and increase my personal power. Interesting role-playing choices there, but I love that idea. In fact, I remember in the Gazetteer series, which basically eventually became the setting of Mystara, which was designed for originally for BX D&D, and then became more of the BECMI default setting, and has worked for basic D&D. In each of the Gazetteers, they would talk about where there are, I guess, wizards. So that if you're making a player character from there, that could be maybe where they got trained, at certain locations, or if they're visiting, that could be a colleague they could call upon, and it tells you what spells are available to maybe try to get access to learn or to trade for, or if you're starting out there saying, you didn't have access to every known spell in the world, every spell in the book. These are the ones that the wizards in this tower or the magic user who would have been able to teach you. These are the only spells they could have taught you, so you will have to pick from those for your starting spells. I think that this idea echoes back to that. Is each temple or each established wizard is going to have their library of these tablets that they guard securely, and then nobody carries them around anywhere. And the idea is that you go in and scribe scrolls from them. And while you are an apprentice or a trainee or a junior member of these organizations, that's kind of what you do until you get the resources to either obtain your own tablets, or maybe even, you can't get to the higher ones, even if you're capable of casting until you've done something to sort of, again, move up in rank, not just in level, but actually from a role-playing standpoint to actually move up in your standing within the organization. You can go back, I guess, to the level titles of some of the older versions of the game as a marker of that. But I think I would prefer to just say, it doesn't matter that you've gained 3 levels. You're still, you don't have any additional rank or standing in this society because you haven't done anything for them. You need to contribute something by donating gold, donating artifacts, performing services. So yeah, good ideas shaping there. I really like it. The other thing I like is that I thought of when you were talking about, this big tome, being in a wizard's tower somewhere in a temple is to, if you could either not tell the players that that's what a spell book is, or you could just really lean into hoping that someone role playing like a thief is going to play naive. But I can just see the idea of you get hired to steal a spell book from this wizard, and so you think, oh, no problem, a book. Even a big book, it's leather and paper, right? And you go through everything. You get past the traps and a golem or a demon or something. You know, an imp that's guard. All these, you know, just finally, you know, by the skin of your teeth. And finally, you've got into the center of the vault, and there's the spell book, and you realize it weighs 100 pounds, and you thought you were just going to slip it in your backpack and leave. That would be really funny. That'd be a funny opening part to an adventure. You know, oh, you got it, and now you realize that, you know, it's this big. How are you going to get out of there? And that's the adventure. Like, how are you going to? Maybe you got in there pretty easily. The trick is actually getting out, and because you're lugging this big, heavy object around, now you can't do the things you would normally to sneak back out past all the traps and hazards and safeguards that the wizard or the high priest have put into place. That'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. So good thoughts, Daniel. Good to hear from you. I'm liking your thinking there. I think we're jamming here a little bit, coming up with some ideas. And yeah, I think it'd be great to get you into the Traveler game if we can make that happen. Thanks again for the call. We'll talk to you again soon. And now let's turn to the main topic of today. This is a segment I recorded several days ago, so I just put a little note in here to let you know I'm about to transition to a pre-recorded segment about Michael Moorcock and one of the greatest sword and sorcery fantasy characters of all time, Elric. Elric is he's one of my favorites. So if you're not familiar with Elric, shame on you. Go familiarize yourself with Elric. Anyway, here we go. So I recently finished the entire Elric of Melniboné saga by Michael Moorcock. They've got a really good series that Amazon has co-produced with Neil Gaiman. I think I mentioned sometime in the past he had collaborated with them to produce the complete Fritz Leiber works. Here he's done it again with not with all of Michael Moorcock's, but at least with the Elric saga. So they have there are, of course, audiobook, Kindle, and hardcover available. Looks like they've got CD available as well if you want it. But they've gone through. It's a new, at least with the recording. I listen to the audiobooks, a new narration, a new narrator. They've added in things that Moorcock wrote after he wrote the original saga. So the first three books of the saga, or forever the three books of the saga, are Elric of Melniboné's Volume 1, Stormbringers Volume 2, and The White Wolf is Volume 3. Each originally contained two novellas within them. But they've gone back and put in the other stuff that Moorcock wrote subsequently in the time frame of the story. So you get other stories about Elric and his allies and companions in the chronological order of the order of events within the saga. Even though things were written much later, they're put back in the order they should be. So part one, Elric of Melniboné sort of first establishes who Elric is as the emperor, last emperor of Melniboné, and then his desire to venture out into the world and his tragic homecoming much later after he is betrayed and has to go back and attempt to reclaim his throne, but tragedy ensues. And I won't do too many spoilers for anybody who hasn't read it. And then the rest of part one and the remainder of the rest of the books, part 2 and 3, explore the rest of his life and his time through the sort of end of days of the world that he lives in. And then they've added a fourth called the Citadel of Forgotten Myths, which is, I guess, sort of pushed in somewhere in the middle of the White Wolf, and that takes other things that. So again, I believe it has some things Moorcock had already written, as well as with some new material, and it talks about a time in which Elric ventures to the other side of the world, seeking the origins of his people, before he returns to the sort of final arc of his time in the world he inhabits. So it's kind of set, I think, in the middle of part 3. and it explores some interesting ideas about the origins of dragons in Morgan's Morgan in Moorcock's larger uh, collection of works. The Eternal Champion Elric is just one instance of the Eternal Champion across time and across different parallel worlds, but across the cosmos. So it explores um, the origins of the Melnibonians, Elric's people, as well as the origin of dragons and how they're related to one another from ancient times. So it's really really good. I felt like the fourth part, the Citadel Forgotten Mists, there were parts where it sort of drug on a little bit. I really enjoy Michael Moorcock's writing. For the most part, he's very creative. He's very descriptive, but sometimes he does have a tendency to sort of get a little repetitive and drag things out. Not too bad. Not so much that I don't enjoy it or don't want to read it, uh, but that said, I think in all, looking at Moorcock for inspiration. I mean, Moorcock is already an inspiration for Dungeons and Dragons, another fantasy role playing game. Of course, he's listed in Gygax's Appendix E for Dungeons and Dragons, or Appendix N, I'm sorry, for inspirational work for Dungeons and Dragons. Of course, Stormbringer is his own role playing game. Has been a version of I think it's based in Chaosium has done it, a direct role playing game. A couple episodes back, Jason and I he left some messages talking about Elric and other products that are where the IP exists. I think with a French company, but they may be working on an English translation of their role playing game. And I had mentioned that I thought Elric and moreover Moorcock's work would work well in Dungeon Crawl Classics. And of course, there's nothing to stop somebody who's familiar with Moorcock's work of running a Dungeon Crawl Classics game based in somewhere in the Elric saga in the world that Elric inhabits. What that would look like, though, it's interesting. Some of the things that show up, and I guess these are minor spoilers for people who are not familiar with Elric, but not enough so that I'm going to spoil the story itself. Elric has these ancestral packs. His magic, he has intellectual or academic knowledge of magic, but the way he draws on magical power is that he has these pacts with various beings. The chief of them being the Lords of Chaos, or particularly one Lord of Chaos, which he is bound to, and he constantly calls on his patron, blood and souls for my Lord, and that's sort of his battle cries. Is he wields Stormbringer to suck the souls out of his opponents in battle. So Elric is when he casts spells. Most of the times you don't see him wielding spells like you think of a typical fantasy mage or wizard. He brings in about one very powerful magical effect based on these pacts with either one of the Lords of Chaos or with various elemental spirits or the ancient sort of totem spirits of insects or reptiles or something like that, and will cause some major magical effect that will turn the tide of battle. But for the most part, when Elric goes into action, it's because he's wielding Stormbringer, which is this, he's sort of bound to. Elric himself is very weak because of born with a lot of congenital weaknesses. They attribute it to him being an albino. I think if you were to write that today, that's not how they would. In fact, they sort of start in the Citadel Forgotten Myths. They really stop saying albino and start calling him a silver skin, which is a variant of a phenotype that shows up in Melbournean bloodlines from time to time, and that so he discovers he's not the only one like him eventually. Then they have to draw on some sort of magical source of strength. Well, for Elric, it's Stormbringer. When he's in battle, it sucks the souls of his enemy and feeds energy into him to the point that he actually takes on superhuman strength and endurance and speed and things like that. So Elric doesn't cast spells the way a typical fantasy wizard or sorcerer does. And you would almost, in sort of modern D&D parlance, think of him more as a warlock, because of these packs, but he's got multiple packs. It's not just one patron. He's got packs, but he also inherited them. He's not consciously forged them himself. He's inherited them through his ancestry as a noble of his species or his culture. And so Elric, that's the name of his pack. I can't believe I was drawing a blank on the Elric, the Duke of Hell, one of the Dukes of Hell, the Lords of Chaos. That's his patron, who's very fickle. Sometimes Elric calls on him, and he gets and he gets help, and sometimes Elric calls on him, and Elric is more, well, I'm awfully busy right now, Elric. There are other things going on, which foreshadows the ultimate climax to the series. And so again, maybe a little help, or I don't have time, or so what have you done for me lately? So Elric really comes to hate Elric, but realizes he's at some point is bound to deal with Elric for the rest of his life, as he is stuck with Stormbringer. He hates Stormbringer. He hates what he has to do when he realizes exactly what it means, and the fact that Stormbringer sometimes almost puts Elric into sort of a berserker rage, so that he doesn't always take the lives of the people he intends to. Sometimes he takes the lives of innocents that he doesn't mean to attack, but he's in a rage, and he's, swinging his sword, about, for any kind of target. And so there's a great tragedy to Elric. I think that's one of the things that makes Elric one of the most fascinating and one of the best of the classic kind of pulp fantasy heroes is that Elric is doomed. He knows he's doomed. The whole story is about his doom, and it ends with his doom. Again, not too many spoilers, but he tries his best to just. Sometimes he tries to escape his fate. Sometimes he tries to mitigate. If I'm going to be a being that brings about destruction, maybe I can do it for a good cause. He really is a doomed, tragic character, and that he has these lofty ideals that he aspires to, despite there's no reason for him to. He's very wealthy, he's very powerful. He'd have just kind of gone with the flow of the circumstances of his birth. He might have been okay, but he knows that his people are at best amoral, and probably actually a lot of them are very wicked and evil. So he strives for something better. He tries and he fails to steer his culture in a better direction. He tries and he fails to help people. Sometimes he actually is successful at helping people, but he ultimately it's short-lived. Something else, is always following him. But it's cool to watch him strive and try to make the best of these dark forces that shape his destiny. So I really enjoyed reading through the saga, and also just it always is a great source of inspiration for fantasy role playing. So I would definitely pick these up if you've not read Elric ever, or if you have and it's been a long time, pick them up. And particularly, you might want to get a little refresher before you take on the Citadel of Forgotten Myths, which I think a lot of people out there may not have read yet. It was just released late last year. So again, the complete saga, 4 books. They're not very lengthy. They're very quick reads, because they're again, like I said, when I mentioned earlier, sometimes the parts seem to drag on to me. It's because I kind of got the point. What had happened had happened. Elric's musing and contemplation of what's happened is sort of starting to become a little circular, and it's time for the action to move on. But that just happens every now and then. So I would still recommend any fan of fantasy, get a hold of these books and really absorb them and digest them. They're great. As far as some of the things that you can see, I mentioned the influences on D&D. Elric being more of a warlock or a sorcerer. You do see when he finally encounters human wizards, and one of his recurrent opponents is a human wizard, that they make note of how much the humans have to study magic, whereas the Melbourneans don't. It's just a birthright. They can call upon these magical these powerful entities to grant them magical boons, whereas humans have to study. And you almost get again, looking at sort of contemporary D&D or Pathfinder, the difference between a wizard and, say, a sorcerer or a warlock. So I think that shows up pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing that shows up. There's some interesting ideas about the sort of physiology of dragons and how it is they breathe fire. That's worth looking into. They really effectively breathe just they create napalm, which of course when they open their mouth and spew it hits the air and it ignites. Um, so it's pretty it's pretty interesting the way that works. The other parallel I saw, when you get to the end, really you can see the influence of Moorcock on Warhammer. When you get into these final big battles towards the end of the saga, where it's law versus chaos, and you see the way chaos begins to warp everything and corrupt everything around it, from people to the environment to animals. That very much is what you can see where Warhammer gets its idea of chaos. And of course, I think everybody understands the law, neutrality, chaos system that permeates the narrative of Warhammer, and the early alignment system of Dungeons and Dragons was pulled from Moorcock. Now, Moorcock was also basing this on the work of Pal Anderson in Three Hearts and Three Lions, who also talked about the conflict between law and chaos in Three Hearts and Three Lions. But Moorcock sort of picked that up and made it his own and expanded on it and created his own uh, more broader, bigger cosmic version of it. I mean, not that it's not a cosmic thing in Three Hearts and Three Lions, but seems to be much, to me, much bigger in scope when you look at Moorcock's multiverse. Also, everything now is about the multiverse. Moorcock, back when he was writing this, he was creating a multiverse. He's got his Eternal Champion. Some of his other sagas feature heroes that are either parallels to Elric, or maybe even they are Elric, but just born in a different time in a different place. And so they have the events that shape them, give them different personalities and different personas, but maybe they are all really the same person, just born time and time again over the course of multiple parallel universes. If you look at sort of where, how DC and Marvel have both started to introduce multiverses into their films. To me, the comic book multiverses was always like, you've got Superman of Earth 1 and Superman of Earth 2, and their life stories are different, but if you put them next to each other, you can tell that's the same person. Or whether that's Bruce Wayne or over in Marvel, whether it's Peter Parker or Steve Rogers or Tony Stark or who that might be, it's the same person. You look at them and you can tell this is just the same person, and different, whose lives have taken different courses. In the movies, you see that you can't even tell they're the same person, right? Sometimes it's the same actor playing the same person in parallel universes, and sometimes it's a different person. That's how we get, a Spider-Man movie that has Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland all playing different versions of Peter Parker. That's how you have different in the latest Flash movie. He looks across the different versions of Earth and he sees the different actors who have played Superman and other DC characters make cameos. Sorry if that's any spoilers for the Flash. I won't go into any more detail. But Moorcock is kind of already introducing that idea. Well, what if there are different versions of all of us and other things, but they're almost it wouldn't be recognizable. They could be, not just have a different life story, but a different name. They could be a different height, a different build, a different skin color, a different male versus female. The variance of ourselves could be infinitely different across the multiverse, and which one is the real verse and which one is where did it all start? Which one is the offshoot and which one is, or even with time, what's the direction of causality across the multiverse, right? He kind of gets into all these things when Elric starts to look into sort of understanding the cosmos and how people travel from one reality to the next, and what causes what, and what's reality in one world may be fairy tale in another, and yet the same person exists as a character or as a participant in those events. It's really kind of mind-boggling, and it's really cool. Maybe more than you want to incorporate into one of your role-playing game campaigns, but there's a lot there to unpack in terms of how Moorcock has influenced fantasy and science fiction and things like that. I know he didn't invent the multiverse concept, but he certainly does a good job of wielding it in the way he creates his larger body of work. And you can see snippets of it in different stories where Elric sort of gets to peer into parallel universes and parallel versions of himself and things like that. So really great stuff. So again, I can't recommend this series enough. Back to the law and chaos thing, though. One last thought is I think probably if you're going to use law and chaos in kind of an old school D&D game, if you aren't really familiar with the way Moorcock uses it and you just kind of try to glean it from the rule books and you've never been exposed to it, well, there's a reason that nearly 50 years later, we continue to debate alignment in D&D across multiple editions, across multiple paradigms, and what does it mean? Because if you just try to glean it from the rule books, there's inconsistencies and there's places where I think it falls apart if you think about it too much. But if you look at this original concept, it was what was originally meant to be there, I think, in original D&D, from Moorcock, it does make a lot more sense that there are these cosmic forces of law and chaos. They oppose one another. They're fundamentally there. There's also there's also a neutral party that sort of arbitrates, and there are people who serve the balance. And the Elric, as the eternal champion, is the champion of the balance, even though he's morally probably more aligned with law, and he is bound by his circumstances to be an ally of chaos. Ultimately, he is a servant of the cosmic balance. So he's not lawful. He's not chaotic. He's not neutral. He's just who he is. It's these bigger forces that he has to contend with that drive things. And you find people who are committed to one side or the other, one faction or the other, and you have people who are completely uncommitted, but they wind up being swept along by the forces of these things. I think if you understand it in that regard, it makes a lot more sense of how to talk about, particularly the law, neutrality, chaos, the 3-point alignment system that you find in old school games, in original D&D and basic D&D, and a lot of the OSR stuff. It gives me a new appreciation for how to understand it, and how to work that back in maybe as a more of a narrative world building component, and not so much worrying about individual character alignment. And if I were to worry about individual character alignment, I think that gives me a new take on how to use it. Certainly, is your alignment something you're committed to? Is it something you've consciously made a commitment to? Is it more just kind of where you think you fall out most of the time, just in terms of your character's motivations, their values, their personality, but understanding what those mean, and that they're not essentially good or evil, but they kind of are. One of the things that Moorcock does well is sort of explaining why I think, all things being equal, maybe the balance is the best. If you had to pick between law and chaos, you'd probably want to pick law. At the same time, law comes with its own set of problems of being too rigid and maybe a little arrogant and a little too high-handed about things, as opposed to chaos, where, there's a lot of sinister elements to it, but at least there's some freedom and some creativity and some passion that's sort of allowed about things. So I think it does a good job of portraying those in ways that maybe they don't always come out in the reading, particularly in D&D books. I think perhaps in Warhammer they do a better job of explaining why people might choose chaos, why bad people might lean towards chaos when you look at sort of some of the problems that come with law being very oppressive sometimes, and the law cares about following the rules, whether the rules are working for everybody, right? So again, ways to discuss with players of the way law, neutrality, and chaos work in the 3-point alignment system. Do a good job, I think, or will be much better if it's informed by the way Moorcock presents them in his work, particularly in Elric. So I think I've maybe talked a little bit in circles here towards the end, so it's a good time to wrap up. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with another episode in the future. Till then, hope you're doing well out there. Take care of yourself. See you later.
Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art is by Dave Bone. Be sure to check out his stuff at ironseer.com. You can leave me a message. I have my SpeakPipe account linked to the show description. You can also send me an email at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Just embed a voice memo, or I'll just read the text to your email during a future episode. Once again, thanks so much for listening.